Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. There's an old saying among marketing people: when someone's giving you something for free, that means you are the product. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. If you give a teenager a scholarship to go to engineering school, you're doing it to make him into something. An engineer. He's the product, or at least he's raw material for the product. On the other hand, if you give someone drugs for free, you're also doing it to turn that person into a product. Problem is, you're producing an addict. That little bit of nuance is important for the subject of this morning's moment of truth. And believe it or not, I'm not going where you probably think I might with this one. Before we begin, let me say that if I see any gender-warring chatter in the comments, you're going to wind up getting blocked, so consider yourselves warned. You've probably heard about a program in Georgia called In Her Hands. Their plan is to give $850 a month in cash to 650 very low-income black women for the next 2 years. No strings attached, or so they say. The women will get the money every month, and it's free for them to use however they wish. That's about $20,400 in total for each recipient. The program as a whole has a budget of about $13 million. Now, this is supposed to be a program for black women in the state of Georgia, but let's not kid ourselves here. We're talking about Atlanta. And being that this is Atlanta, the program has since stopped taking applications, presumably because they've already found the 650 very low-income black female candidates they were looking for. We're not going to dwell on the fact that black men are the majority of the homeless in Atlanta, and that there's a bunch of government programs for women that all these single mothers are recipients of already, and that black men don't have access to. If you're a black single mother, there's a program for you, in fact, a few of them, but hey, why stop there? This program was dreamed up in part by an Atlanta councilman, but also this is not a government program. It's basically got some people who have put their heads together, and this is what they were able to come up with. Now, let me say from the outset that I'm of two minds on this proposition. First of all, I think this program is something that ought to be shown to Kamala Harris and slap her in the face with it. Here's something that only benefits black people, and even more specific than that, black women. And Kamala Harris, of course, needs to hear that just so she can understand it can be done. Something earmarked not just for a particular demographic, but for a portion of that demographic. In other words, an example of what everybody else in this country gets. Local initiatives that cut the check are fine by me. It doesn't have to be necessarily from Uncle Sam, just as long as the check gets cut. But there is another side of this equation. While a monthly infusion of cash for 2 years is good, let's be clear. These are black women in Atlanta, which is supposed to be the black mecca, or so I was told. But it's not a black mecca for businesses. Black people don't own anything in Atlanta, not of any consequence. What little economic position they told themselves they have is quickly eroding away. Many of you remember my now classic video, We're All Detroiters Now. Well, perhaps I should have done a follow-up called We're All Atlantans Now. Now, as I mentioned before, it was an Atlantan city councilman, Amir Faroqi, who was the one who announced the establishment of the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund. And that's supposed to be the actual organization that's supposed to be putting this together. Now, it is in partnership with a nonprofit organization called Give Directly. Now, you've probably heard the phrase minimum guaranteed income before, and this is supposed to be basically a pilot program, albeit one that doesn't have government sponsorship, but it's a pilot program for what something like that could look like. So what will happen once this giveaway money is all used up? Well, the program doesn't keep track of how the money is spent, so I guess they're relying on the honor system. They'll brag that this money makes it where these impoverished single mothers don't have to borrow money, basically exactly what you would expect if someone's income had doubled. But what doesn't get discussed is what happens to them afterwards. What's the game plan to lift these women out of poverty? Without that, these giveaways become nothing more than vanity projects. Unless you think that this Georgia initiative happens to be some one-off, they've already done it in California and Mississippi. They gave money directly to black mothers living in extreme poverty, their words, not mine, other than a couple of obvious and meaningless stats saying that the women had basically had their income doubled and as a result they were able to buy more stuff with it. Nobody came back to see what became of them when the money stopped coming in. I looked at the Mississippi pilot program for this minimum guaranteed income thing. It was on Ms. Magazine's website, and they had spoken about a black female salon owner who was one of the people behind that guaranteed income effort in that state. Okay, so you had a black businesswoman who owned her own salon, and she was trying to ask how to help extreme low-income black women get lifted out of poverty. That's understandable. Though it was something of a surprise, though, when this same owner of a salon became a recipient of that money when the pandemic hit last year, $1,000 a month for 12 months. Her business got closed down as non-essential, so she used the money to pay utilities. After she was allowed to reopen a few months later, she continued getting the money and used it to hire an interior decorator for her shop, to buy new equipment, and to add a pedicure station to her salon. Now, according to the story, that was in 2020. She claimed to have saved some of that free money that she had gotten, but when the snowstorms hit in February of this year, she had to spend it all to put herself and her children up in a hotel until power and water were restored. Okay, so we've gone from money for extremely low-income black women to money for black female business owners. The idea behind this seems to be that there are some black women who want the government to initiate a national guaranteed income program. Let's put aside entirely the convenience of the same salon owner who was pushing for a minimum guaranteed income program in her state becoming one of the recipients of it, and instead let's look at the efficacy of this program altogether. I don't intend to get into a whole lecture about the necessity of financial literacy or anything, but I guess what I'm trying to say is how much fiscal responsibility can this person be expected to show if they've already demonstrated that they have poor physical responsibility? If the idea is to lift somebody out of poverty, that's fine, but if you're going to get out of poverty, you got to have a plan. Otherwise, all you've done is to provide some poor single mother with what equates to some mad money. She might pay whatever old debts that she's got out there, but it's guaranteed that before long she's going to acquire some new ones. When you listen to the alleged benefits that the people behind this program have listed, it all has to do with consumerism. Nothing about the women actually being lifted out of poverty. It's just a matter of they've got some more money in their pockets to spend it on things. What these poor single black mothers need is to own businesses. Well, at least in the Mississippi example, one of them does, and she decided to start one of these programs so she could apply for it and use the money to spruce up her business. You know, when I read the phrase extremely low income, a person with enough money to buy and maintain a beauty shop wasn't exactly the first thing that came to my mind. As long as my tax dollars don't have to go to it, I'm fine. If you got some donors out there who think that this is a nice political project for them to contribute to, that's all well in the. But that's exactly what the people behind this, like Aisha Nirandoro, are demanding. They're demanding tax dollars go into this. The article says it themselves. The ultimate goal for this Mississippi program is to gather evidence to make the case that cash without restrictions is a crucial and powerful component of the social safety net that the federal government should provide. Or as Nirandoro says, I definitely think we need federal policy. Interestingly enough, though, Nirandoro's little program is funded entirely by private philanthropic donors. And apparently it never occurred to them to start business incubators, to start a no-strings-attached business grants program for all these poor single black mothers. Apparently you got all of these, no doubt, majority white philanthropists, and the idea of business grants, or at the very least making sure you start these women understanding the basics of running their own business, never occurred to any of them. Just, we're going to have a giveaway so that you can make your bills on a monthly basis. Really? That's as far as their thinking on this went. Not to get into conspiracy corner, but come on. That doesn't even sound right. Now, as we all ought to know, if you want to drive a wedge between people or even groups of people, the fastest, most expedient, and effective way to do it is to use money. That's a way that you can create an entire class of people out of whole cloth. Use economics to divide them. And when you look at this, that's exactly what it looks like, because that's exactly what it is. This is not based on elevating poor single black mothers. This is just more of the same. The government's going to take the place of a black man in the home. Black people as a group are being economically held down as a group. Is there anyone who's going to say that black women are in a worse boat than black men on this score? I don't mean for this to be a gender war rant, and I hope that nobody's foolish enough to try to bring that here. What I'm just stating are the facts. This looks and smells like the same old classic feminist operation to drive a wedge between black women and black men. And what interesting timing. For several years now, you've had this growing drumbeat and chorus where you've had black men and black women coming together, beating the drum for black empowerment. And how convenient, right on cue, we have the same old feminist playbook being dusted off and dragged out once again. Only this time, instead of them starting the idea in Washington, now they're starting it with a bunch of private investors instead. And I can't help but notice there's not some hue and cry, some shrieking stories on Fox News going, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. Instead, the white media's take has been supportive of it. Now, name for me any time that black people have been getting money, not even for free, even if a black person earns the money. When's the hell's the last time a black person's gotten some money and you haven't had the white media throwing shade at them or casting aspersions on it or asking, are they too young to have it? Is it too much money to have? What are they doing with it? And that there's some sort of controversy surrounding it. When's the last time they've ever done that? Now you got this group who's putting together money to give to single black mothers and saying we want to take this show on the road and get the federal government to just give money, no strings attached to black women, and the white media doesn't want to shoot that down, not even the right-wing nuts. We've seen this before. They start off with a fallacy, a lie that says that only black women are economically suffering and only black women are deserving of any sort of minimum guaranteed income or what have you, and that's just not true. In and of itself, I don't really have much of a problem with this whole minimum guaranteed income idea. If someone were to add some adequate ancestral qualifiers to it, then this could make a good framework for a genuine reparations plan. Then again, reparations are not rocket science, at least as far as monetary disbursements go. And it does put the lie to the idea that, oh, it would just be too difficult, too hard to do anything that's only for black people. But in my opinion, this little scheme here is meant to confuse exactly that idea. You start saying that black people have been systemically, historically oppressed and economically deprived, and then someone points out, wait a minute, but you've had black women who have been getting money from these programs free with no strings attached. Why, even white women don't get that. And next thing you know, we're not talking about reparations anymore. Instead, we're talking about something else. These giveaways for single mothers are no substitute for reparations, but that's precisely what the white media will try to cast them as. But the problem here goes a lot deeper than the white media predictably mislabeling all this. Any plan that deliberately leaves out fully half of the black population is not a plan. It's a scheme to subsidize a segment of our group based not on need so much as on gender. This is how you divide people. Please don't be naive and think that the people who put money into this did it out of the goodness of their hearts. This is a political agenda, and it's one that we ought to recognize because we've seen it before. The practice of arbitrarily choosing certain people from a given group to bestow resources on, that's meant to make them inclined to like you. Give a group, or in this case a subset of a group, resources arbitrarily, resources that other members of their exact same group are not allowed to have, and you will have manufactured an imbalance within that group. And it will be a lot easier for you to tell them that they're not like the other members of their group. Because after all, they're doing better, or at the very least, they've got easier access to thus and so. And they'll go along with it because when people are getting things, they're incentivized to go along with whatever narrative will help them keep getting things. This is what the Europeans did when they invaded Africa. They chose certain ethnic groups from among the native populations. Like, say, in Rwanda, you got the Hutus and the Tutsi. When the Europeans invaded, they invited the Tutsi to join with them and told them, well, you guys, we think you got something in common with us. At the very least, we think some of you do. And that being the case, why don't you get together with us and we're going to help confuse the internal politics of all of you guys and you're going to help us take over. And the Tutsi went for it. They're not the only ones. The Europeans played this exact same game, chapter and verse, in places like Kenya and Nigeria and elsewhere. Give these Negroes a few trinkets. Go ahead and give them some of these European clothes here and tell them that you're like the guys who just showed up with the guns shooting people. Why, we basically think we got something in common with you. They don't actually believe it, but they want you to think they do. And the Europeans knew that this strategy would work because they had been doing it to other Europeans for 1,000 years in places like the British Isles and Scandinavia. But as black people here in the US, we already have previous experience with this. We saw it in the 60s and 70s. You had government programs, the occasional corporate or government job, and then the white media praised black women for allegedly doing better than black men. That's what all of the latter half of the 20th century was about. Now, of course, this wasn't factually true, and here we have the same black feminists who were bragging on themselves 20 years ago who are now admitting that black women go to school more than any other segment of the society and wind up with more student debt and less assets than any other segment. As Napoleon said, when your enemy is destroying himself, or in this case, destroying herself, encourage her to keep doing so. They don't need to get all black people on board. In fact, they don't even need to get half of black people on board. They don't need all of black women to go along with it. Just a critical mass will do. Now, the front black women behind these initiatives, they've gone out of their way to not mention black men, and that wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. And since when have any black people gotten money and the white media wasn't all over them, trashing them about it, attacking them, calling them lazy, looking for a handout, or doing exposés saying, we want to see where this money goes. You know they're all a bunch of welfare queens. You don't see the white media going ham about this. Doesn't that sound just a little bit suspect? We've seen this maneuver too many times for us not to be able to see through the scam now. Sooner or later, somebody should raise the question, are we talking about lifting up the black community as a whole? If someone were to ask that question or bring up that subject, do you seriously believe that the people behind this scheme wouldn't immediately be screaming black male privilege, black men have male privilege? It's a recipe for gender warring. As I said at the beginning, when someone's giving you something for free, that means you are the product. And the purpose of that ought to be undeniably clear. It's the old 70s playbook. This is about handing out some free cash and enticing black women to go it alone. Black women don't have a community. Black women are not part of a community. They're part of a sisterhood. Same thing that they were doing in the 60s and 70s, telling black women, we'll let you have some jobs at the post office or at City Hall. And it was a pathway for black women to be seduced into the lie that they didn't need a man, well, at least not a black man anyway. This is about undermining the black community, trying to drive divisions and trying to cause fractures within the black community. In the past, the government program said, we're going to check and make sure that you don't have a man living in that home, because if we find that there's a man living in that home, you're not going to get a check. But with this idea, they're wholesale saying we're going to reward you for not doing so. Now, obviously, I don't believe that any of the black women who call the B1 home would ever fall for something of this nature. But the point that I'm trying to make is we're watching white supremacy make it very clear they will easily throw out tens of millions of dollars if they think that it's going to fracture the black community. All of a sudden, they can find the money very easily, and the white media is not praising it or otherwise disparaging it or attacking it. Last time they pulled this stunt, it took 3 generations and a lot of lives lost and progress thrown away before people were finally willing to admit that they had been tricked. Learn to know the difference between a leg up and a setup. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Michael Williams, Cheryl Shaw, Mark Seen, Brandon Boykin, and Shane Alexander. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.